once again.
Morning.
Hope you're all enjoying a good new year, a good start to your new year. I'd like to tell you that I'm the default sensei again. Reverend John Turner was supposed to be here today, and he realized that there's the annual Dharma School Appreciation Lunch today at OCBC. Not only does John have to be there, but Reverend Harada, Reverend Mutsumi, Reverend Ellen, Jim and Janice, and so who's left? So I said, sure, I'll be glad to come to Vista. It's too busy at OCBC, which is where Alice is today, and she wanted me to be sure. The first thing I did on my Dharma talk was to give you her best wishes, and that she misses all of you, and hopefully she'll come with me in March. So, greetings from Alice. As I was listening to Casey's introduction, I thought how serendipitous, because Casey, you stole my Dharma message. So, thank you very much, Namo. Not really. I like to start with a fable. And a good friend of ours at OCBC, Reverend, he's just a layperson, Bob Bolander, does a blog. He does poetry. He's a former English teacher, high school. Very literate, very intelligent, and I told the porcupine story at a meditation service, and he wanted that story. Then he turned it into prose, and I liked his version better. So this is called The Tale of the Porcupines. Now, I'm not sure what it has to do with my Dharma message, but maybe you'll be able to make the connection better than me. It's just a great tale. The frigid winter was colder than ever. The porcupines, both young and old, were deeply concerned for animal friends who were dying because of the bitter cold. Therefore, they decided that it would behoove them all to form a close-knit group. Huddled together, they could keep one another warm. It seemed like a good idea at first, but then they agreed with unanimity that being so close was not working out. Their quills pricked porcupines in proximity, but later they learned that separated, they were worse off. For no denying, unable to keep one another warm, the freezing porcupines were dying. If they planned to survive the winter, they had to act, and so they decided that being banded together was more beneficial than being divided. And so they grouped together again, realizing that they could endure the little jabs from the others' quills, but they would survive the winter for sure. And the moral of the story? I'll tell you that at the end of the Dharma talk, but use your imagination. This morning I want to reintroduce two concepts that have helped me on my Buddhist path. I was here, I can't believe it, but in October of 2017, that long ago, and I talked about two concepts that are very rooted in Buddhism, but not part of the doctrinal text. One of them is shikata ganai, or shogunai, and the other is wabi sabi. Now I know 2 years ago, I hardly remember what I did yesterday, so I don't expect you to remember what I said about these 2 years ago. So if I repeat something, I think I'll be okay with that. Recall that shikata ganai, or shogunai, is used to describe situations beyond our comfort or our control. In other words, it cannot be helped. It is absolutely authentic reality. And we do not have control over all situations, events, or discomforts in our lives. And you could think of Shikata Ganai in a rather single, rather contemporary word, whatever. If you recall the first noble truth of the Buddha, life is suffering, or dukkha. And a few weeks ago, Reverend Jerry Hirano and his wife, Dr. Carmela Javalana Hirano, were at OCBC for a service. And they gave a course afterwards on psychology, on Buddhist psychology. And Dr. Carmela had these words, which really, really struck a chord with me. She says, "Your pain is real. As Buddhists, we are aware that living this human life can be really tough. And that's why we go to our temples and bazaars, so we can monku, complain, to our Sangha friends. Our complaints fall to any of these 8 sufferings. We complain about birth, or aging, or illness, and losing loved ones, being in the company of unpleasant people, not getting what we want, or getting what we do not want, or getting what we thought we wanted. The pain of constant changes in the mind and body, and eventually death. And those are all great examples of the Shikata Ganai attitude, because all of those we have no control over, none whatsoever. Now let's take wabi sabi. Wabi sabi is a unique Japanese aesthetic that appreciates the beauty of imperfection. It is about embracing reality in all its manifestations, crumbling, cracking, fading. It rebels against the expectations of being perfect, appropriate, or politically correct. It restores the right to be okay with mistakes, or accidents, or foolishness, and stupidity. It is all about being comfortable with your imperfections, your impermanence, and your incompleteness. And yet, it is somewhat optimistic, claiming that nothingness or emptiness can be full of possibilities. Now, I was already familiar with Shikata Ganai and Wabi Sabi before I became a formal Buddhist. So when I joined OCBC, and when I became interested and finally signed up for the Minister Assistant Program, I thought I would experience profound changes, and my life would be better or different, more spiritual, and perhaps I could make a difference in my limited little world in Orange County. But you know what? Becoming Buddhist did not profoundly change me, nor studying or listening to the Dharma, nor imitating rituals like gasho, oshoko, and chanting, or doing meditation. Now, of course, being exposed to those core rituals gave me a solid grounding or foundation in our temple customs. But imitating other practitioners doing Buddhist practices has not profoundly changed me. But what is beginning to change is learning who I am by reflecting carefully at how my life and all its happenings are as they are. Often without control, Shikata Ganai maybe, and my imperfect and my foolish personality flaws. Wabi Sabi maybe. One of the teachers that I always go back to in terms of the books he's written is Reverend Guime Kobosi. And if you're just starting out in Buddhism, those 2 books I can highly recommend, Center Within. To learn Buddhism, this is what Reverend Kobosi says, to learn Buddhism is to become aware of life, which means to become aware of oneself, to change one's life, regardless of how much we learn. Unless your life changes, nothing is learned. It is just accumulated knowledge. When there is too much mind in our activities, we become artificial, and our lives do not flow smoothly. Now, like Casey, I have a tale to relate to you. It happened last week. And for 3 days last week, Alice and I were on a tour of the Central Coast. And it was through a travel agency, and they book a coach. And we get on the coach. And this particular tour, the coach took us to Union Station in LA, and we got on the Amtrak. And we went to San Luis Obispo. So that was very fortunate because the Amtrak doesn't have to worry about traffic, cars, freeways, and whatnot. And we got back on the bus, and then we spent 2.5 days touring the Central Coast. We were hoteled in Pismo Beach, and from there we would motor out to San Simeon and surrounding areas. Unfortunately, we weren't on the Amtrak going home. We were on the coach to go home. And on Friday, which is the worst traffic day in LA, we left Pismo Beach for Solvang, and we spent a couple hours enjoying Solvang. And our tour director says, we must be on the road no later than 2:30. And I said, 2:30? That's awfully late. But 2:30 it was, and so we departed Solvang at 2:30. And we did pretty good, going through Santa Barbara, Oxnard, and so forth, until we hit Agoura Hills. And it was from 60 down to 0. And I said, well, this can't last forever. There's impermanence. Well, it lasted, and it lasted, and it lasted. And I sat there, and there's nothing I hate worse in my life than to be out of control and not being able to do anything about traffic. And the more I sat there, the more angrier I got, just like Casey did. And I tried to recall some of my Buddhist quotes, my Buddhist practicings. I tried to meditate in my seat on the bus. You know, when I do meditation at Orange County Buddhist Church on Wednesday night, they're mostly people from the community, not members of the temple. And I tell them, in between the sitting meditations, we do a short standing meditation. And I tell them, you know, we're not just doing this for relief from sitting. We're doing this as a reminder to take your meditation practice with you when you leave the kodo. Don't leave it with me. Well, I apparently left my meditation practice in the kodo because it did not do anything for my mood on the trip home. And we pretty much crawled all the way back to Fountain Valley, which is where we were started from, so that was the end of the trip. Having endured LA traffic, kind of put a damper on the great time that I had before we hit the traffic. And I felt foolish, I felt stupid, I felt angry, all of the negative emotions that are normal for a human being. And I thought, wait a minute. I now have an idea for my Dharma talk for this time. And so I was grateful, at least for that experience in that very, very small way. But it took me a week to get over it. And there were some other things that happened too, which I won't go into. But I just wanted to share that with you because Shikata Ganai or wabi sabi, if I remembered those concepts, I didn't have to remember doctrinal phrases from Buddhism. I just had to remember some very, very simple concepts. Wabi sabi and Shikata Ganai. It's beyond my control. What can I do about it? I do have control over my mind and how I react to things. But that Friday, I had no control over my mind at all. There's a quote on harmony. Harmony is a great characteristic of wabi sabi, and it's by the Chinese philosopher Lao Tzu. And it goes like this, and it's one of my favorite quotes. I'm always accused of being the slowest person on the earth. I move slower than a turtle. And I just say, well, I'm slow, but I'm mellow. So. Nature does not hurry, yet everything is accomplished. Now, if I thought about that on the bus, I could say, well, Friday afternoon traffic does not hurry, but we'll get there. It might be 6 hours later, but we got there. Leonard Cohen on imperfection, another tenet of wabi sabi. Ring the bells that still can ring. Forget your perfect differences. There's a crack in everything, and that's how the light enters. And I thought about that, and I said, yeah, look at those freeways. They don't work. They're horrible. And yet, there's a light in there because we're all interconnected on those lanes. We have to drive carefully. We have to be patient. We can't let road rage take over because we're all interconnected on there. And if we're going to get from point A to point B safely, we have to work together. And from the Dhammapada, in chapter 16, verse 2, the chapter is called The Pleasant. The Buddha says, avoid attachment to what is pleasant and what is unpleasant. Because losing the pleasant causes grief. And dwelling on the unpleasant also causes grief. I could have used that advice sitting on that bus on the 101 and the 405 freeways last Friday. I want to conclude with some more words from Dr. Carmela. She's just full of so much wisdom, and she's so natural about it. And she does not wear Buddhism on her sleeve, and yet you can sense her faith and her trust in the Dharma, particularly in other power. Dr. Carmela concluded her talk that afternoon with these words. On the essence of Buddhism, especially Jodo Shinshu, faith or spiritual belief is not about everything turning out okay. It is about being okay no matter how things turn out. You know, it could have been okay if there was no traffic going home on Friday, but it wasn't. Nice, foolish me, stupid me, I should have been okay with that, because I certainly expected it to be that way. We are human with flaws and cracks in our minds and our bodies. But our wounds is where the light of wisdom and compassion can enter us. So I feel better reading those words. I feel better listening to Casey's tales of her contentious type meetings and how she dealt with her frustration and anger. We all have to find a way to harness that anger, to control our minds. Dr. Haneda will be here in March, and he keeps harping on Buddhism is nothing but the study of the self. Absolutely true, the study of the self. Because all the theories, all the doctrines, all the concepts that I have been exposed to, that I've listened to, that I've tried to memorize, did me no good unless I understood myself. And that's where I'm gradually progressing to after 20 years of being at Orange County Buddhist Church, which tells me it's going to take my whole life to figure out this. Okay, back to the moral of the porcupine story. I hope you used your imaginations. So here it is. Here's the moral. When we look at life and consider all our interconnections, it's best if we can learn to live with one another's imperfections. And another way to look at the story, life can be painful, but we should strive to put up with all the pricks in life if we truly want to survive. And I want to conclude finally with some words from the Confucius. It's another quote of his that I should remember to incorporate into my frustrated, angry, and foolish life. He says, by 3 methods we learn wisdom. First, by reflection or meditation, which is most noble. And the second is by imitation, which is the easiest. And therefore, being the easiest, it's also the most shallow. And the third is by experience, which is the most painful and the most bitter, but the most rewarding. Please join me in Gasho. Namo Amida Butsu.